and thank you for joining us today. My name is the Reverend Angel Luis Rivera-Agosto, and I serve as the Community Engagement Senior Coordinator for Justice Initiatives for the National Benevolent Association of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in US and Canada. We are the Health and Social Services Ministry of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in US and Canada. The National Benevolent Association, known as NBA, collaborates with leaders and health and social service organizations to strengthen and transform communities through compassion, healing, and justice. The NBA provides education, companionship, inspiration, and resources for organizational and leadership development for health and social service ministries. All of our work with partners is grounded in our historic mission of justice and advocacy. As we get started, I would like to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on the NBA website at nbacares.org. I repeat, nbacares.org. You may also follow along via automated transcription using the AI-generated captions. Look for the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Today's topic is Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, and you. What to expect and what to do. This summer, HR 1, also known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and from now on, we'll be using the acronym OBBA to refer to that law, was signed into law, bringing with it a dramatic shift in federal priorities and significant implications for the ways that organizations support health, food access, and financial stability in their community. A common question we've heard from our dialogues with church leaders, nonprofit organizations, and working families is, how can I take care of my health? How can I provide food for myself and my family? How can my nonprofit continue to offer health and nutrition services and support? The implications of these issues are truly life-threatening. In fact, I can't think of a more critical discussion at this moment, besides the one related to the immigrant community, regarding both public policy, church witness, and the well-being of our people in the country. In a society where the rich and the powerful insist on reducing public assistance and shifting resources to their pockets, trying to convince us that private entrepreneurship could fill the people's needs, Scripture challenged us as a society by inviting the poor, the disabled, the lame, and the blind to the feast of the fullness of life. And I'm quoting the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 14, verses from 13 to 14. We as a church, as the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the US and Canada, have committed to do so as we approved in our 1997 Christian Church Disciples of Christ General Assembly held in Colorado, the sense of the Assembly Resolution number 9720. There and us, by concerning the least of these brothers and sisters, firmly expressed that the General Assembly of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ has spoken to resolutions as in 1963 about our responsibility for, and I quote, caring for the sick, the poor, the troubled, the lame, the blind, since the beginning of the Christian movement. And I end the quote. We have, as a church, declared that every person in need has every right to call upon the resources of the community without embarrassment and without being assigned second-class citizenship. Services are not favors to be bestowed, but resources on which anyone in need should have a rightful claim. In this webinar, we will examine the severe consequences of this recent law for essential services such as healthcare and nutrition, assessing its effects, and exploring strategies for families, churches, and communities to resist it, while also equipping ourselves to organize our prophetic and pastoral work effectively. We will focus on the effects of OBBA on healthcare and food assistance programs, particularly Medicare, Medicare, and SNAP. We intend to structure the presentation as a Q&A dialogue with our guest for this webinar. Throughout our dialogue, if you have questions that arise, we invite you to use the Q&A feature accessible by clicking the icon at the bottom of your screen to submit them. Please include your email address so that if we cannot answer your question, we can follow up with you directly after the webinar. You may also use the Q&A or chat features to request technical assistance. Again, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on nbacares.org in the coming weeks. Now, please let me share my joy in introducing my fellow panelists for the night. It is my absolute joy to introduce Ms. Sue Pechilio Polis. She's the Vice President of Public Relations and Government Affairs for Lutheran Services in America. Before joining Lutheran Services in America, Sue served as the Director of Health and Well-Being at the National League of Cities, where she founded Cities of Opportunity to engage mayors in addressing the social determinants of health. With expertise in health policy, her work covers housing, economic opportunity, mental health, substance use, obesity, trauma, and data for well-being. Previously, she managed external relations and strategic partnerships for Trust for America's Health and worked with AARP on health and financial security for vulnerable populations over 50. Sue was also the founding National Director of Advocacy for the American Heart Association. Hello, Sue. Thank you for being here with us. If you can share a brief greeting for our audience, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, and hello, Luis. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you tonight and with all who have joined us through your ministry and outreach. And thank you for that generous introduction. And I wish I was joining you for a more exciting topic. Unfortunately, I'm here to really talk about, as Luis said, these cuts that we're all grappling with. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity to join you. Of course, we're really coming together tonight at a time where we have a rapidly changing federal landscape specific to the passage of OBBBA or HR1. Different folks call it different things, earlier this year, including the impact of recent cuts to Medicaid, SNAP, and yes, Medicare, which I won't talk about as much tonight, but there are significant cuts to Medicare that are statutory, and I don't think we quite know what this all means yet for Medicare. We'll take a look at the initial and longer term ripple effects in states, along with how we forge a path forward. So said another way, as we were preparing this dialogue, I think the way that, we talked about approaching it was kind of threefold. How do we block cuts, including future cuts? How do we bridge to ensure the needs of people are met? And build and strengthen durable partnerships and coalitions for the future. So I'm going to try to talk about that structure as we go through this conversation. So let's talk about where we are right now. You all know that we're in the third week of a government shutdown with no clear path forward. In the short term, this is impacting programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, Head Start, among many other programs. So it's important that we stay vigilant in urging members of Congress to work towards a resolution that prioritize ongoing Affordable Care Act marketplace tax credits that are set to expire at the end of the year to ensure affordability of coverage for many that would be implicated. Next slide. So I wanted to share initially, this is the work of a great partner of ours, the National Council of Nonprofits, and they've got this advocacy alert that you can just go to their website and use to make your voice heard, which is so important right now. Getting Congress back to work is really essential for progress. So you can use this tool and take action and share it with others. Now I'm going to take a step back and take a look at the shifts and cuts to key social programs through OBBBA earlier this year. Next slide. So these headlines are going to look familiar to many of you. For the better part of the past year, we've been seeing and navigating headlines like this about major debates underway in Congress and their potential impact on both people and communities. Including impacts to state and local budgets, which we're going to talk a fair amount about that tonight. With all the federal cuts and changes, it trickles down. And so it's important that we work together to support our state and local communities to find a path forward. Next slide. So to dig in on the details, let's start with what's really, happened through these tax cuts. In short, OBBA enacts the largest cuts to healthcare in history, paired with the largest cuts to food assistance in history, in order to fund tax cuts mostly geared toward corporations and wealthy individuals. The bill includes about 1.3 trillion, that's trillion, in cuts to SNAP, Medicaid, and the ACA marketplace, the Affordable Care Act marketplace, which is nearly the cost of just the plan's tax cuts per household of those earning $500,000 or more in annual income. So, right, we're literally taking from the most vulnerable people in the country to support tax cuts for the most wealthy. That's really what's happened. So let's take a look at some Medicaid basics on why these cuts are so harmful. Next slide. And sorry, you can go to slide 6. Next slide. Thank you. So you all probably know this, and that's why you're on this call tonight, right? Because Medicaid is literally a lifeline for children and families, older adults, and people with disabilities. It's the largest payer of behavioral health care in the United States, which many people don't realize. And of course, since Medicaid is a federal state program, it occupies a considerable part of state budgets at present. Next slide. So as a proxy, this slide is really meant to give you a picture, right? Looking at this graph, especially the one on the left, the size of Medicaid budgets as part of state budgets overall, right? So you can see Medicaid prior to these cuts as a significant part of the picture, right? Along with significant state resources that go to education, public assistance, corrections, transportation, etc. Next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how Lutheran Services in America has been working to defend cuts to Medicaid over the past several months. Next slide. And this visual might be a little hard to look at, but continues to really anchor our work at Lutheran Services in America and across our ongoing efforts to defend and strengthen Medicaid, right? Because yes, we've been on defense, but we know for the long term, we have to be focused on also making sure that the program works as efficiently and effectively as possible to do the most good. So with the Medicaid cuts and OBBBA, while it is far from good, we have to remember that the cuts could have been much worse. While it may not feel like it, we did avoid the worst case scenarios in terms of potential cuts to Medicaid, meaning that the program wasn't block granted, it's not capped, and there's no direct cuts outright, right? So while it doesn't feel like a victory, we have to remember that voices were heard. Our voices were heard, and we must continue to be actively engaged. And I'll talk about this toward the latter part of the presentation, but remembering that a lot of members of Congress are new and haven't been around for a long time, and they simply just don't know a lot about the program. So it's really important, even though that we don't feel like we're in a defensive campaign the way we were before the president signed this bill in early July, it's still so vital to be talking about what's at stake as we continue in our day-to-day work, because folks really, even members of Congress and their staff, simply do not know a lot about how Medicaid actually works, right? So at the same time, the right-hand part of the screen, we seek to strengthen Medicaid and support our faith-based social service providers to be well positioned to work in partnership with their state Medicaid agencies and their Medicaid managed care plans, which is where a lot of the ways Medicaid now works in the majority of states is through managed care. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this today, but I'm just trying to give you a picture that we have a very broad view associated with our Medicaid efforts so that we both defend and strengthen. And on defensive Medicaid, which is where I'm going to spend most of my time this evening, I want to talk to you about our campaign that we launched earlier this year, Here We Stand, for People, for Care, for Medicaid. Because I want to share a little bit about what we accomplished. Next slide. So Lutheran Services in America Association members, we are an organization of 300 health and human service providers across 46 states. We touch roughly about 7 million people each year. And so our members had a variety of mechanisms through this campaign to really, the campaign was aimed at really strengthening their knowledge to effectively engage in communications with both their members of Congress and the media. So we've worked to schedule and proceed with a lot of meetings on Capitol Hill. And, you know, we did these both in person and virtually for our members that really couldn't get to Washington, D.C. in a timely way. Did a lot of these virtually. We had 16 legislative meetings that included our board of directors and our policy committee that they did jointly. And we also have a disability network. And so we were able to engage all segments of Lutheran Services in America ecosystem. And then we also started earlier this year what we call our Capital Conversations. There'll be a link later if you're interested in signing up for those. But this was really our effort to make sure each month we were providing an update, providing resources, tools, and perspectives of the different partners that we work with. And then we also did do regular advocacy updates to keep everyone in the loop, and we offered those to a lot of partners. So I just want to talk briefly. We had well over 80 meetings on Capitol Hill between February and June. And we continue to do those. We have not stopped meeting with members of Congress because, as I said a short time ago, it's still so important to educate and inform our members of Congress. We had strong engagement through our channels, including Capital Conversations. And then we also have an advocacy tool on our website that we keep up so that we can support members and partners to take action and reach their members of Congress in a turnkey way. Next slide. And then this is really just to share, we don't do this work alone. We do this work through partnership. And so we were part of many coalitions. There's some listed here. But it may be important for you to know and be connected to other coalitions as well, like the Interfaith Roundtable and the Washington Interfaith Staff Community. We actually did a joint Faith Hill Day together in June and included LSA members from key states. We've worked in a very targeted way to make sure that we raised our voice to people, members of Congress who are on the key committees of jurisdiction. Not all members of Congress were equal because if we had members on House Energy and Commerce Committee or the Senate Finance Committee, that's where these decisions were really getting made. So we did a lot of targeted outreach, including with the Interfaith Roundtable. There's also a partnership to protect coverage, which is patient-centered. And so we were joined with organizations like the American Heart Association, the American Cancer Society, the American Diabetes Association, very patient-centered organizations so that we could raise our voice with the people that we serve in mind as patients. Also with the Modern Medicaid Alliance, this is a coalition of all sorts of health providers along with health insurers. This Medicaid fight was quite different from what we've seen in the past, in part because I said earlier, right, that Medicaid has moved from fee-for-service, where it pays for each service a person gets, to managed care, right? And so managed care plans have a lot of they're stakeholders now, right, in Medicaid. And so we had a very different coalition than what we've seen in Medicaid in the past. And then the Protect Medicaid space, which is a disability coalition, because as I said, we have a disability network. Next slide. And so I just wanted to, I'm going to pause here in a moment, but I just want to say we have to remember that advocacy is essential. We cannot accept defeat. This is not over, and we must continue to act. So while it doesn't feel like we've had a victory, it could have been worse. And I know it doesn't feel that way for many of us in our communities, but it's important to remember that our advocacy did work and we did defend against the most harmful cuts to the program. So let me pause there and see if there's questions.
Thank you very much, Sue, for these introductory remarks. As we see the landscape we are working for justice is kind of complicated, and I am sure, as you are saying, that it could be worse, but we can't get it into a rest, but to continue our struggle for justice in healthcare and nutrition. So thank you for these introductory remarks. So I have a question then for you, Sue. What are the impacts of the OBBA federal budget cuts and requirement on state level programs and services? And you know that there is a balance between federal budget and state budgets regarding nutrition, regarding healthcare,
Yes.
and that equation, as we know it, has been affected by this law. So even though I am aware that the legislation was carefully drafted to avoid immediate impacting U.S. citizens, instead of differentiating them from existing measures and even projecting their effects until 2034. And that's something that we need to take it into account. the impacts are kind of put into medium to long term, but we need to analyze and to take measures at this moment. Can you describe those impacts within a specific time frame, along with how they will be affecting citizens in their healthcare, please?
Thank you. It's a great question. And I'm going to ask you to bring back my slides. And you're absolutely right that, these changes and cuts were deliberately designed, right, so that they would not all hit immediately, and especially trying to avoid big cuts before the midterm elections. It's not really working out that way. And I have some slides that'll speak to that a little bit. While these cuts don't go into effect, in some cases for a few years out, states are anticipating these cuts and already making significant changes. So I do want to say, even though technically some of these aren't in effect, Medicaid directors are already moving, right, to implement, for example, work requirements. So this slide is really meant to give a little bit of a picture of what it looks like each year, right? And so let's start at 2025, right? A key thing that happened as part of OBBA is that states are now prohibited from using provider taxes. And the reason that's important is because the majority of states use provider taxes to fund their share of Medicaid. So states are scrambling, are scrambling to plug the gap that this leaves in how they cover their share of Medicaid costs. Secondly, right now, many states are accepting letters of intent and applications in order to spend their share of what's called the Rural Health Transformation Fund. And so while these won't go far enough to address all of the cuts, and the reason it's the Rural Transformation Fund, right, is because, yes, we have gaps in access to health care all over the country, but in rural places, it's much worse. And there's many rural red Republican districts that were very concerned about the cuts that were coming through the OBBA and what that would do to rural hospitals in particular. So this Rural Health Transformation Fund, the idea is to help plug some of the gaps of the cuts, but it's not big enough to go far enough. And states are implementing this as we speak. Like a lot of states already have up letters of intent, deadlines. It's a fast moving train. So that's already underway so that those dollars can be allocated. And then additionally, next year, we'll also see rollbacks, right, during the Biden administration in order to expand Medicaid to working adult population, right? Not older adults, not children. A lot of states expanded Medicaid to cover very low income adults, right? And now basically this package of cuts includes rollbacks of the federal match for those expansion states, which means in effect, right, that fewer people are going to be eligible and enrolled in Medicaid. So I highlighted in yellow the ones that are going to be really important to engage in at the state level as, right, if you think back to the redetermination, right, when we ended the COVID public health emergency, right, that meant people were not going to continue to be auto-enrolled in Medicaid in the way that they had through COVID. So we had to have people reapply. There was a redetermination. We're going to have to use our durable lessons learned as this unfolds to make sure that we help as many people stay covered as possible, right? And so that's going to be a huge lift, and it's going to be really important to get information to people so that they can stay enrolled. Next slide. So the cuts I just described may come in many different forms, but they all lead to the same place, right? Huge reductions in coverage for low to moderate income people and additional costs that states and localities have to shoulder and make up the difference. So keep in mind that those impacts will mean harmful spillovers beyond the harm done to those directly affected, right? And that's what I want to talk a little bit about here. When 15 million people lose coverage, surge of newly uninsured leads to costlier and more uncompensated care, threatening already strained hospitals and clinics, so impacting everyone's access to emergency and specialty care. Higher premiums, meaning out-of-pocket costs for tens of millions of people, don't just hit families, they drive up costs for small businesses trying to provide employee benefits. Cuts to Medicaid ripple out from home health care workers to community clinics to nursing homes. Everyone feels the strain, and especially over time, a sicker, less economically secure population is harmful to state and local economies. As people are stripped of affordable care, they face new challenges, right? Workers and others have less disposable income to circulate into the economy. Next slide. And now I want to just talk a little bit about SNAP initially. There are some main things to know, right, about what was included in OBBBA. This is the largest cut to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program in history, and the unprecedented cuts risk food assistance for the more than 41 million people who receive help through the program, including many children and seniors who now are at higher risk of losing their food assistance. And that's happening through the shutdown immediately as well, right? So there's a lot to be engaged here to make sure that we're making our voices heard. Among the mega bill's harmful SNAP measures, right, it includes a significant expansion of already harsh and effective and red tape laden work requirements. There's those work requirements again, right? To parents and other caretakers of children age 14 and up and adults from age 55 to 64. The new law also eliminates the current exemption to the work requirement for veterans, right? It eliminates the current exemption to work requirement. I want to say that again, right? For veterans, people experiencing homelessness, and youth who recently aged out of foster care. So these are very vulnerable populations that have been exempted that are no longer exempt in SNAP in terms of work requirements. It takes away food assistance from many lawfully present immigrants, including those with humanitarian protections such as refugees, people granted asylum, and certain victims of domestic violence or sex trafficking. And a requirement for most states for the first time is to pay between 5 to 15% of SNAP food benefit costs while also shifting additional administrative costs their way, which again exacerbates harm and can result in some states leaving their SNAP program entirely, meaning they won't be able to offer it. So I'm going to pause here.
There was a question about managed care. What does it mean to receive managed care, Sue? I think that we can take the question at this moment, please.
Please, yes. So when I talk about Medicaid managed care, right, for many, many years, Medicaid was fee for service, meaning if a doctor prescribed a test or any kind of treatment, they were reimbursed and paid for that service that's been provided. But over the last several years, what we now see as the predominant form of coverage under Medicaid is a system where state Medicaid programs contract with private health plans called managed care organizations to provide services for Medicaid recipients. So what happens is each state has, they have to select essentially from a competitive process the plans that are going to manage their Medicaid benefits. So it could be United Healthcare, it could be CareSource, it could be any Centene, right? Any of the big health plans also have Medicaid plans. there are also safety net community health plans. So there's different types of for-profit and nonprofit plans that offer this managed care. But essentially, it's no longer fee for service. Those rates of what's paid to your provider, your Medicaid providers, get negotiated through these managed care contracts.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And we have another question, and maybe we can uh, deal with it. Um, I received a question about how do these changes in Medicaid could affect justice impacted persons now back in community after incarceration. Do you have any information about the specific impacts for former incarcerated people?
I mean, with Medicaid, right, because it's a state-federal partnership, much of this, and in terms of how Medicaid gets allocated, is at the state level. So
Mhm.
it's the variability across states is going to be very significant because it's not going to look the same in every place, right? So like for those benefits for the incarcerated, a lot of states have been offering those through essentially waivers, exemptions through federal waivers or process that allows them to expand benefits, right, to incarcerated. We haven't heard um, we haven't heard uniform guidance yet from the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, other than the pause on new health-related social need waivers, which cover health-related social needs, right? Housing, transportation, food. They've paused waivers in that way, but not for justice-involved populations, I believe, yet. So, but again, it's very state to state because a lot you had to have some waiver or some way um, to cover those individuals. So what's going to happen now is state Medicaid directors, right? You've got to do more with less, right? So their question they're going to be asking themselves is, do we cover more people or do we cover more services? And what's happening, even I'm not even sure Congress intended this exactly because, right, Medicaid is made up of mandatory services that have to be provided. And then there's a bucket of services that are optional. Home and community-based services, which have become more of the prevailing path over institutional care, is an optional service. So that's going to cause a lot of hard decisions about how those dollars get used. And there's an institutional bias because those institutional, right? When I say institutional, hospital, skilled nursing facilities, institutions that serve people with disabilities, there's essentially now a push back to institutional care because those are mandatory versus home and community-based services, which are optional. So there's a lot of trade-offs that are going to get made state to state. And if you're not in conversation at your state level, whether as an individual or as an organization or part of a coalition, you're not going to have a voice in how these determinations get made.
Really. That is why we need to be organized and ready to advocate for the people. Just one question. The other questions that I am seeing through the chat can be asked as Sue continues her presentation because some of the concerns will be covered. But one that I want to address now is to say SNAP is possibly being cut in a week.
Well, the government shutdown is what I mean, right? Because during the shutdown, right, we don't have our federal workforce working for us. And so one of the highest concerns is what's going to happen to SNAP benefits now, right? Are those dollars going to get allocated? And that's the concern. And so, with like many other things, the administration is saying one thing, but the fact is, those benefits are allocated and they're supposed to be paid. So we're going to have to be vigilant that happens. But it's not automatically going to happen because this administration says that they don't have to make those um, payments and services available for SNAP. So this is another example of where we've seen a lot of intervention legally, that we may have to pursue this in that way too. And I would just urge you, if you're not on the National Council of Nonprofits website, they track these lawsuits that are filed on a whole range of topics. They have a great tracker on their website. It's a way to stay up to date on what's happening through the legal processes.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Sue. And from what we are seeing, the impact of OBBA to the well-being of our citizens is real and very harmful. Please, can you go on into specifics on how these cuts affect nutrition and healthcare at a state level? I think that's one of the questions that some of our people have asked. And as you continue with your presentation, I'm sure that you have some data that could be helpful for that. Thank you. Please.
So let's look at a little more detail, right, around this cost shift to states, right, related to SNAP. Essentially, right, I said this a little bit earlier, states must now cover 5 to 15% of the benefit costs starting in 2028. That means essentially up to, right, anywhere between 5 to 14 billion each year could cost states, right? I'm saying that this unprecedented requirement is going to cost states between 5 and 14 billion each year, starting in 2028. So real dollars, right, in the context of state budgets, especially considering, right, states, localities, they have a requirement to balance their budgets each year. So there's going to be, I mean, all of this, right, Medicaid, SNAP, what's going to be happening with Medicare, it all creates a very gloomy picture for state budgets, right? Because those are really hard decisions, right? And often education, right? Because that's usually the largest share of state budgets. That's going to take a hit, certainly. The Republican bill also includes significant changes in the federal state cost share related to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, right? Those administrative costs. Currently, it's a 50-50 split. It's half and half, right? And now that's changing to a 75-25 split, with states paying more, right? So there's a 25, additional 25 to states, 25 less to the federal government. So equal to about 3.5 billion nationwide, more a year, that's annually, right? Leading through tough, again, tough budget choices, especially at the state level. So, what this all means is what I just said, right? Really hard choices at the state level. Let's go to the next slide. These are just some examples, right? We can see how this is shifting the burden to states and the hard choices that have to be made, right? So, like in California, essentially, they will have to pay 1.8 billion, roughly equal to state spending, just for their Department of Health, right? So that's a huge amount of money that's going to be in shortfall. Colorado would owe about 194 million, equal to 2/3 of their Department of Public Safety, right? New Jersey, right, 287 million, or nearly its annual state spending on county colleges. So, there is a link that I embedded here from our partners at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. We will share these slides, and you can look to see what the impact would be in your state. Next slide. And in a world where states, again, I just said this a few minutes ago, states are required to balance their budgets. A significant drop in federal resources means they're going to have to make very painful trade-offs, right? Which I've started to lay the groundwork for. So how do they address this, right? They can either raise new revenue to offset the cost, right? Which things like higher taxes, make harmful health and food cuts, or shift funds from other priorities. Essentially, those are the levers available to them, right? States can and should prioritize revenue raising, right, to bridge the gap. This shouldn't just be a cut scenario, but that's a politically tall order in any state, right? And history tells us that while some states will surely seek to raise taxes, at least in part, states as a whole are going to be very unlikely to do that because, right, there's already a lot of economic pressure, a lot of inflation, right? So it's not an easy time to propose, a tax hike. So cuts are likely to include both new health and SNAP obligations and cuts to other state and local priorities, right? So schools, housing, infrastructure. Education is particularly vulnerable because, as I said, it's such a large share of state budgets. So on the next slide, I want to show you a couple headlines. When I said, right, even though these cuts don't go into effect immediately, the next slide 20, is going to share a few of the leading edge of the trends we're already starting to see emerge, right? Arizona lawmakers, the top corner on the left, face big budget deficit due mostly to massive tax cuts and school voucher expansion, right? Iowa, $2 million shortfall. This is before the current cuts, right? West Virginia schools don't have money to implement needed security measures. Ohio, private school vouchers, scholarships blow past estimates, right? So we already see a number of states dealing with deficits, and these cuts are on top of already strained state budgets in many cases, not all. So again, that state to state variability, it's really a factor. So it's a matter of really understanding the health of your current state budget and where hard decisions are going to have to be made. Let me pause here and see if there's additional questions.
Some of the questions that our friends are sharing are more based in terms of what to do in spite of this scenario, where we are facing so many hardships in state budgets and also the way it has been discussed through Congress. As MBA, we are a ministry that serves directly to families through nonprofits and churches. And there's a question about faith-based coalitions. What are those? Where are they? Moving on into what can be done in a situation like this. What would be then, Sue, your advice for families, churches, and nonprofits to face the impacts of OBBA on these programs?
So let me share, I have a couple more slides that just talk a little bit about now what, right? What do we do? And the in DC, there's always buzzwords and I call it the group think, but I think the group think has this right, that this is a time for durable partnerships and coalitions. So think, I encourage you, right? Think back around other hard times, right? When we had the housing bubble, we had the COVID pandemic, right? We had to find durable partnerships to carry us through these times. And so I just want you to keep that front and center. We're not alone, right? This is a time when we have to reach out and do things that we wouldn't normally do. I had a member in North Carolina during the defense before the budget bill was passed. And he said, I prefer to sit in my office, but I can't do that right now. I have to go out and I have to seek durable partnerships. So I want to just have you keep that front and center, right? But let's take a careful look. This is a little bit more specific to Medicaid and things you can do, right? So let's talk a little bit about state And then I'll share a little bit more about things that we're watching federally. But as I said, right, Medicaid, state to state. So it's really important that you're keeping up to speed on what Medicaid programs decisions are being considered, right? And continuing to monitor federal policy guidance and shifts. And we do that at Lutheran Services in America. We're tracking federal policy shifts. But you can also sign up on hhs.gov. That's the United States Health and Human Service Department. The hhs.gov, you can get their alerts to stay up to speed. The second one here, right, center, partnerships, join, expand, start, partnership through shared goals and priorities. Understand Medicaid's limitations around payment and eligibility in your states. And some states, right, they already have work requirements. So the federal law may not impact them because they already have. So it's very important to know about where your state fits, right? And we, unfortunately, in this country, right, for the past few elections or more, right, we have red states, we have blue states, and we have purple states. If you're in a red state, there's a higher likelihood that you may already have a work requirement, right? You may already have that for Medicaid. If you're in a blue state, chances are you probably don't. If you're in a purple state, you may or may not. But it's important to know your state environment, right? And then this says engage early, right? Changes in Medicaid take a long time and approval from multiple policymakers because of that state-federal partnership. So if you're not reaching out, and remember, as nonprofits, you can educate and inform. And, that means storytelling, right? Sharing your perspective. And as citizens, right? You can advocate. So remember in the way that, you can do things in the way that you're, acting, whether you're in a formal or informal capacity. And lift lessons up, right? As I said, because of the COVID emergency, lifting, and the unwinding, right? Meaning people weren't automatically enrolled in Medicaid. We just went through this not long ago where we had to help people, right, re-enroll for Medicaid. So we have to rely on some of these durable lessons learned, right, at this time. And then I would say federally, especially as part of my role at Lutheran Services, we're really trying to seek clarity and highlight operational realities to federal leaders. Like even in this stalemate around the government shutdown, it's been an opportunity for us at the federal level to reach out and remind these lawmakers about we're just in the shutdown. The cuts haven't even taken effect in many cases, and look what's already happening, right? So we have to use the moment, prioritize partnerships with state facing and other key partners on work and community engagement requirements, right? Again, partnerships, that's going to be what's durable right now with all of these different challenges going together, working together, and continue to lift up examples and learning on issues that impact the Medicaid population, right? We have a mental health crisis in this country. Medicaid is the largest payer of mental health services. So what is this going to mean in your community? It's really a time to educate and inform as much as possible. Next slide. And again, from a Lutheran Services in America perspective, you're going to see a couple quotes I included here because prior to the government shutdown, we were gearing up, and I'm not joking. I wish I were. We were gearing up for another budget bill. Republican leadership in the Senate had indicated that through these quotes and the links that I shared here, that they're not done yet. They want more cuts, right? So when I said it could have been worse, I mean it in the sense that like there's still bigger threats out there and talk of more cuts. So we are not done, and we have to be vigilant, right? And for Lutheran Services in America, something we're prioritizing is bringing our members together in states where where they have a presence. Some of our children, youth, and family providers in Michigan, with our senior service providers in Michigan, our disability providers in Michigan, bringing them together as a durable coalition, right? And that's something that we're in the process of implementing. But it's going to take a lot of vigilance, especially at the state level. Um, and then finally, I have a link here for our advocacy list. We send out every other Tuesday. We share advocacy updates with what we're hearing and what we're learning. And you can sign up. It's at no cost, and happy to add you to our list. Next slide. And then the work ahead, right? Beyond Medicaid, the work ahead, right? In short, I don't have to tell you, right? I'm in Washington, D.C., right? You all are much closer to what's happening on the ground. It's a challenging moment, but it's an opportunity. And it may not feel like an opportunity, but in times of crisis, there is always opportunity, right? For states, localities, and advocates to step up. So all is not lost. We just have to be willing to act boldly. And that's why I say partnerships and coalitions are durable, because acting together is more durable right now. It's more necessary and it's more feasible, right? And we have to mitigate short-term harm, document it over the coming years, and build forward, because we do have, I'm going to talk about this in a little on the next slide, but we have midterm elections next year, right? We hope. So we have to look ahead and we have to work ahead. So a lot of our members right now, there's off-year elections. Some states have governors up for re-election and different lawmakers. Early and often, telling them what your concerns are, making sure newly elected officials after these off-year elections next month, you already have a rapport. It's going to be very important, or the organizations that you work with locally or at the state level. So we have to continue to beat the drum and show the harm, right? And there's already, I want to say this sincerely. I mentioned we targeted it, certain members of Congress, through our Here We Stand campaign. And we did that with a focus on newly elected moderate House Republicans. And lo and behold, many of them signed letters against these cuts. And they went ahead and voted for him anyway because of the pressure from the president, honestly, right? But this is not something that's sitting easy with people because, right? Republican House members in moderate places know what this is going to do to their constituents. And it wasn't an easy vote, and they're looking for paths forward, right? So it's important to remember that not everybody, even though people may not have voted the way we wanted them to, it was a hard vote, and they want to be part of the solution for their constituents and for their districts and in some cases for their states. Pennsylvania, Congressman Fitzpatrick voted no. He was the only House moderate Republican to vote no, right? But if folks want to come back to Congress, they're going to have to find a path forward for their constituents, right? So I would just say when it says reject a cuts first reaction, this is intended for the state level too, but it's important to not give up and to stay vigilant, right? Champion a revenue first policy response, which means, right, it is going to be hard to raise taxes on individuals, perhaps at the state level, but there's other mechanisms, right? Like, not that they're popular, but right, because people say they're regressive, but soda taxes, right? There's going to have to be a different conversation about how you raise revenue. Guard against costly state, federal tax linkages through, right, yes, these things are joined, right? But it's important to also separate them out and make sure we're really clear about the implications of federal cuts, right? And continuing to work both sides, right? Federal requirements and the impact in states. And I would say finally, you know, work to lay the groundwork for better policies in the future, right? That this is a time to organize and build power and work together, right? To make sure policymakers understand that it's going to be important to lower costs, broaden opportunity, improve health, improve employment. You know, a key lever we're working is the workforce shortage, right? We've had an ongoing healthcare workforce shortage. We have a shortage of direct service professionals. We have to keep people healthy. It's imperative if we're going to have a good workforce and a strong workforce to help people stay healthy. So stay in conversation and make sure we're vigilant, right? And finally, next slide. I just wanted to share a few resources with you. I mentioned the midterm elections next year. This is our best opportunity, right? We have a Republican legislature, House and Senate. We have a Republican judiciary, right? The Supreme Court. And we have a Republican in the White House, right? So the midterm elections next year should be a very intentional time. And so I've included two links here so you can look to see when you see a toss up or a competitive race, that's something to pay attention to because that means that it's going to be close and that we have to work we have to work hard. So pay attention to the midterm elections next year. These are links to the Cook Political Report. It's bipartisan, nonpartisan tracking of close races, and these are the ones to start watching now, the toss-ups and the competitive. Um, Nonprofits, again, right, can educate and inform elected officials. That's well within our 501(c)(3) status. So refer to the Alliance for Justice for lots of advocacy resources for nonprofits so you can understand what you can and can't do. And as individuals, we have a role to play, right? We know democracy and elections are under threat. And so this protectdemocracy.org has some great resources, examples of things you can be doing to make sure you can help get people out to vote safely. So I'm going to stop there and see if we have any additional questions.
Thank you very much, Sue, for all the information that you have shared with us and the suggestions regarding how to move forward. And I think that it's very important for us as churches, families, communities to mobilize, but also to organize, to be ready to face and to confront the actual injustice that we are living in. NBA will be developing a process of organization where we will be dealing specifically with storytelling, compelling storytelling, also how to engage in relationships one on one, not necessarily lecturing people or teaching them necessarily, but coming out of our own testimonies, our own lives, and how lives are at stake, and the values that binds us together, Republicans, Democrats, Independents. We are all suffering the impacts of this law, and we need to shift beyond partisanship in order to achieve justice. So in that sense, how to organize these relationships, these one-on-one relationships, how to strategize creatively to build power with the organization and the alliances that are around us, but also how to build power over those who are making decisions at this moment. And power is just a relational thing. It's the ability to achieve purpose, as Martin Luther King Jr. said to us. So how to strategize, how to get into concrete, specific, and effective actions to move into our constituents, to move our congressmen to achieve the purpose that we want at this moment. I just want to check a question in the Q&A. It is saying How do we advocate when our representatives and senators refuse to listen to us? That definitely, my dear brother, is part of the struggle. We need to check what are the interests of those in power, and how and our resources to overcome those interests, and then to build enough power so we can level the field and provoke the changes that are needed at this specific time in history. We will be organizing some workshops at MBA with partners, so to organize for achieving justice, and definitely this will be one of our key components in our organizing process as MBA. So definitely, they will need to hear us at this moment. And of course, as I said previously, this webinar has been recorded. So all of the beautiful, compelling, and challenging presentation by Sue will be available for your viewing and for sharing with our brothers and sisters in a few. If you, by any chance, have any other particular question, we are opening the chat or the Q&A section for questions that you may have. We still have some minutes available for your for your questions. In the meantime, I am intrigued, Sue, in terms of the racial, ethnic, and gender implication of the cuts. If you by any chance have any information regarding how does it affect in terms of African American communities, poor people, women, especially since monoparental families led mainly by single mothers have been increasing throughout the country.
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's a great resource, and I'm going to try to quickly find it and put it in the chat. But you can look to see Medicaid coverage state by state. It's tracked by Kaiser Health News, and I'll put a link in the chat so that you can see, including demographic information on the Medicaid population in your state. It does look different. I feel like I'm a broken record, different state to state, but let me see if I can find the link and share it with you.
Definitely, and that's a reference that I use, KFF, and it's wonderful the statistics and the information that they share. And in the meantime, there's another question that I want to address. Many congregations rely upon the ACA for pastoral health care. What do you recommend, Sue, for congregations to support their staff in times like this? If you have that information.
Um, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understand the question. How we support staff during these difficult times. Is
Yeah,
that the?
regarding pastoral, because in the question, the person is saying that many congregations rely upon the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, for pastoral health care.
Oh,
Uh,
I see.
what alternative do they have at this moment?
I think if you're part of an Affordable Care Act, you get your insurance through an Affordable Care Act exchange. They have a re-enrollment, same as employer-based coverage. Um, and those things won't be impacted. However, if you buy your insurance on the exchange on your marketplace in your state, and you use a tax credit to do that, that's what is expiring at the end of the year. And that's what the Democrats in the Senate and the House are trying to ensure in any government shutdown package agreement that those ACA premium tax credits are extended so that people can afford to buy their insurance, because without them, many wouldn't be able to afford it.
So, and a very important information, Cynthia McBride, thank you very much. For Disciples Congregations, the pension fund is working on providing some emergency support for clergy who may lose or be unable to afford coverage. So you can also communicate with the pension fund for further assistance in that resort. So in our denomination, we have the pension fund as a very as an organization who works in solidarity with pastors. So please contact the pension fund also in that particular case. Well, my friends, maybe we can take one more question before wrapping up. If you have some other question, please post it in the chat or in the Q&A. But it has been a very interesting and challenging uh, presentation. And in that sense, my dear friends, the important thing here is to first deal with the direct impacts of these policies by providing, as Sue mentioned, maybe by creating pantries at churches, seeing how nutrition is affecting our communities. Maybe it's a good opportunity to create gardens and to look for food security and food sovereignty. And we have ministries in our denomination that could help us with that, as the Green Challenge, for example. But also how to build alliances. We, Lutheran Services of America and the National Benevolent Association, we're part of the Interfaith coalition. And in the Interfaith Roundtable, and we have a pending work together to continue working for these issues and so forth. So, dear friends, brothers and sisters, thank you very much first to our fellow panelists, Mrs. Sue Pechilio Polis. Sue, thank you very much. We have been blessed by your work and honored by your presence here today. We encourage you to stay tuned, my dear friends, for more discussions like this webinar, as we intend to continue exploring ways you can make a positive impact on your family, church, nonprofit, and community. Another way to stay informed about our work and get involved is by signing up for our newsletter at nbacares.org/newsletter. You can mark a few check boxes to let us know you're interested in NBA program topics there. And please check the webinar chat where our dear colleagues from the marketing and communications office are putting the specific link for that. Finally, we ask you for your support. Your generous gifts help NBA continue its work of creating communities of compassion and care and supporting the work of justice and equity. We are ever grateful for these blessings. You can donate online at nbacares.com/donate. Okay, please support the work of NBA in that resort. And for my friend Sue, is there any event you want to advertise here? Some pending event? Well, we always be checking what our brothers and sisters from the Lutheran Services of America are doing. We did a campaign together as we advocate for repealing the OBBA, and we use as MBA the resources, the very compelling resources created by Lutheran Services of America. So thank you very much to our brothers and sisters at Lutheran Services of America for such powerful resources. And then, my dear friends, brothers and sisters, thank you for your time today. Please reach out to us with any questions. We hope to see you again for our next events. Thank you very much. Have a good night and blessings to you all.